Hello, Key Stage 5. This is going to form part of your revision for the poetry in the Lang lit specification. We're going to start with My Last Duchess and kind of work our way through the poem. So, first thing that we need to consider is the title. Looking at that title, My Last Duchess, there's the use of the possessive determiner my, which implies sort of an ownership that the Duke has over this Duchess. Remember, we're looking all the time at voice in this particular specification, the voice of the speaker. Does that link to the voice of the poet? We have to question that all the way through. So My Last Duchess, there's this control there. Remember, all the way through Browning's poetry, we're looking at homodiegetic narratives where the speaker is part of the story. First person dramatic monologues, so that voice is very clear and very strong. That Ferrara there, just underneath the title, is also very interesting. Contextually, this might relate to somebody called the Duke of Ferrara, Alfonso II. His first wife died 2 years into their marriage through suspected poisoning. A lot of people believe the Duke actually poisoned her. She was only 16 when she died. So we've got this fictional voice, but there is a perhaps contextual relevance to that may add to the voice of the poem. Although this specification is not interested in the context particularly, it is very helpful to us to understand that, to get into that poem a little bit more deeply. So right at the start of the poem then we have the demonstrative pronoun that being used, not her or she, that's my last Duchess. Firstly, that is using deixis with the Duke as the deictic centre to orient the speaker to face the painting as such. We as readers of this poem are looking at this painting. The unseen and unspecified listener is also looking at the poem, and we're being told to do so by the Duke. The fact that it's using that rather than she obviously points to the fact that it's a painting, but also objectifies that Duchess. All the way through this, we learn that the speaker of this poem, the Duke, is somebody who wants control and power, and through objectifying her, that's what he's doing, isn't it? He's taking that control. So moving there, looking as if she were alive, we're introducing straight away an incredibly sinister tone. The painting is a very, very lifelike, very good, a talented painting by somebody who is a very good artist, but also we realise straight away that perhaps this Duchess has met some sort of sinister end. I call, there's the first person pronoun there. There's his voice again coming through in the sense of control, but also there's a sense there that he controls the narrative surrounding the Duchess. He calls that piece of wonder. He's the one who says that this is something that is something worth looking at as such. He says now, so there's an implication there that there's a change in his view or his opinion. What did he think of her before? What did he think of this art before she was encapsulated within it? The Frau Pandolf reference there, bear in mind he is a very famous artist, Frau Pandolf, but there's a use of metonymy there. It's not Frau Pandolf worked busily a day, it's his hands, that's metonymy. And it removes Pandolf's agency again. It's his hands, not him. So the only person who has any agency, any control over actions in this is the Duke. Those specific linguistic choices, very, very important to pay attention to. Moving on, line 5, wilt please you sit and look at her? We've got that implied listener that a dramatic monologue would always have. Very common to a dramatic monologue form. But the question there is indicating the Duke's expectations of the visitor. He has the power over the Duchess, he has the power over the visitor, and he has the power over the visitor's ability to look at her, to admire her painting, something he did not have in life, as we find out later in the poem. I said Frau Pandolf by design, very important there. There's an implied command. By design, he designs this, he makes the choices, he makes the decisions over how we view this painting. As we move on, line 9 through 10, since none puts by, a lot of you will have noticed this from your GCSE study of this text. There's a sense there that only he allows people to view the image. None, no one, only him. And that's a sense of his ultimate power. The voice is showing us all the time that he wants that control. As we move on to line 11, seemed there is what's called a relational verb, and it indicates that he thinks that his visitors will ask the question. So in this little section, I said Frau Pandolf by design through to and seemed as they would ask me if they durst how such a glance came there. He believes, the Duke, that anybody who sees his painting will want to ask why she looks so passionate, so earnest. But because of the relational verb, we realise that this may be a window to his paranoia. It's seemed as if they would ask me. It does not say they asked me. Okay, so it's his paranoia, his suspicion coming through there. If they durst is really interesting. Durst meaning if they dared. This implies how scary the Duke is, or at least that he believes he is, and that they would have to dare in order to comment. And that's sort of an embedded aside there. He's reminding us once again that he is the one in power. Excuse my wobbly hand there, I'm trying to hold my camera, I'm not very good at this. So, not the first of you to turn lasses. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. So, we have this psychological fracture coming through here. He switches to third person, her husband's presence only, not my presence only. So he's kind of almost fracturing away a little bit there. And there's the jealous tone that really does come through, indicating that he feels only he should make her blush or feel joy or respond in any sort of positive manner. The spot of joy we could interpret it as a blush, maybe of shyness, of embarrassment. Perhaps she was flirtatious. We don't know this because the only voice we hear is the Duke's. It is all his perspective, as per the nature of a dramatic monologue, of course. Perhaps we have perhaps Frau Pandolf chance to say, using that perhaps to indicate that he doesn't actually know what they spoke about. He's just putting his supposition in there, his belief, his essentially paranoia coming through. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought. We're on line 19 to 20 now. That use of the noun stuff is very dismissive. It's almost as if things that other men said to her are valueless, that if it isn't the Duke paying her compliments, then it has no meaning or no importance. And again, we have she thought being a mental verb. That's an internal verb. How can he possibly know her thoughts? Is this maybe further insight into his mental instability, his paranoia? She thought this, she thought that. How would he possibly know? We cannot see other people's thoughts, and we never hear her voice. He doesn't say, she said X, Y, and Z. So we never hear her voice. We only hear what he believes her to have thought, or what he believes her to have done. Okay, moving down now. We're on to sort of line 22. We've got this, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. So we have this kind of aside there, how shall I say, like he's thinking. It kind of adds to the sense of him speaking. And the repetition of the adverb too, she's not taking him seriously enough. He views her as fickle, as somebody who is easily won over. And that's not something that he likes, because he wants her to value him above everything else. And we start to see that even more as we move on. She liked whatever she looked on. So that whatever, again, there's a sense that she didn't discriminate, that everything and anything was something to be admired. Now, this could be because she was young, and she, if we're talking contextually about that young wife of Duke Alfonso II, young, perhaps a little naive, that's the sense we might get. However, we don't know. All we know is that he thinks she was flirtatious and that she valued anything and everything rather than putting him above the rest. So on line 25, he really compounds that. Sir, 'twas all one, my favourite her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the boughed cherry, some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace. That exclamative sentence there, sir, 'twas all one. We've got that tone of shock or surprise that she could behave this way. The horror that she could act in such a way and not favour him above everything else. And then he lists for us, there's a list there. His favour is no more important than a common sunset, a bunch of cherries that some idiot, some officious fool gave to her. That even the mule that she rides around is only given the same glance, the same love, the same affection as he is given by his wife. And he cannot stand that. And we've got there some sort of fricative sounds to comment on. Some officious fool. it sounds very much like he is dismissing that, or perhaps that he has some sort of anger or distress over this. So moving down towards the bottom of the first page. Good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900-year-old's name with anybody's gift. So, good, but thanked I know not how. He's unable there to articulate his concerns. Browning's chosen to put caesura in there. It breaks it up. It makes it sound like speech, but also, perhaps more importantly, makes him sound kind of angry. There's a sense there that nothing he says can be trusted almost, because it's his perspective and his conjecture. He says somehow. He doesn't really know, does he, how to articulate what's concerning him. And that's very interesting, because it perhaps means that what's concerning him is perhaps of less importance than we as an audience might think. And we've got this kind of narcissistic tone coming through. We've had this all the way through, but it's really emphasised here. My gift, that sense of self-importance. The fact that he refers to his name as a gift, that noun gift, something that we give to others, that we generously give to somebody. He believes his name was sort of generously bestowed on her, and she ought to have some gratitude for that. And then at the bottom, anybody's gift. So we've got that indefinite pronoun, anybody's, indicating that he should be revered or treated more highly. There's a sense of his self-importance, his jealousy, his hunger for that power over her, but also over other things in his life. And then he sort of is more dismissive there, this sort of trifling. He thinks that it's sort of silliness and ridiculous that she would behave in this manner. Okay? So, on to the next page. Again, excuse the camera work. We have, in speech, which I have not, he's kind of got this self-deprecating tone there. That means when you put yourself down. He's trying to claim that he doesn't know how to speak, to explain himself, that he's got some sort of lack of skill in this respect. But, I mean, we're reading his monologue, so his claims are kind of refuted by the fact that he's able to explain himself as much as he has. Almost making him, in my opinion, almost like he's lying in a way. To make your will quite clear, he says, I don't know how to say things to make it known, to make what I want known and understood. But if we focus on the idea of will, we've got there that what he wants, what he desires is more important, or in his opinion is more important, and that he wanted it to be quite clear, something that she should have realised and understood without him explicitly explaining it. And the fact he says, just this or that in you disgusts me, it's what he wanted to say to her. That disgust is that strong feeling of repulsion at her and at her behaviour, which is kind of worrying in a way, that we've got this voice coming through that is so repulsed and disgusted by somebody, and yet is claiming that he couldn't explain that in words and try and make her behave in the way that he wishes. Here you miss, or there exceed the mark. We've got this spatial deixis. Here's how you're being good, here's how you're being bad. You need to make sure that you behave, essentially. But it's used to convey when she has or has not met his expectations, which is very concerning if we think about the voice and the kind of violence and anger that comes through within that. And if she let herself be lessened, so let, that idea, that verb there, that she's at fault, she should submit to him. Lessened, so the verb lessened, the idea that she should be taught, she should learn how to behave, and that he's almost angry that he would even have to say this to her. He's almost looking down as if to say, I will not tell you how to behave, you should know, you should be really, really grateful for everything I've given you. And he kind of suggests that he has the power to teach or correct her and to set the standards for her behaviour, but she wouldn't let herself take heed of his lessons, the things that he wanted her to know. Line 42 then, even then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. We've got that assonant ooh sound, choose never to stoop, which kind of adds emphasis to that choose and stoop, the idea that he has agency. He refuses to teach her, to lower himself down, to tell her how important he is. She should just know. And the fact there that the verbs are ascribed to him, I choose. He's basically saying he has the control and he has the power again. And we've got this sort of, this structure here where he kind of introduces her indiscretions, but then tries to explain how he couldn't deal with those indiscretions, which as we move through the poem and we get towards this next bit, I gave commands, we start to see how this escalates. She smiled, no doubt, but who passed without the same smile? There's this interrogative sentence structure. He feels like he knows the answer. He's asking it, but it's clearly rhetorical, isn't it? He feels he knows that everybody got that same smile, and his jealousy really grows here. This grew. We obviously think that this grew as in she was smiling at more and more people, because it's obviously through his voice, but as readers we can also interpret that it's his jealousy that grows as well. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. That end stopping there and the caesura within the line, this grew. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. We've got this tension being created. He makes a decision, he sticks to it. It's very simple. It's the structure of that sentence is very simple, very forceful. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. It's very, very powerful, much like the Duke himself. And we're reminded there she stands as if alive. So we realise there that very first reference to her looking as if she were alive is something that's very important, because she is no longer alive. He has perhaps helped her towards an early end. He then switches back away from the narrative of the Duchess, and we realise that the person that he is speaking to is somebody whose master wants his daughter to marry the Duke. So my last Duchess, there's an implication that he's speaking to this servant in order to get a new Duchess. And he says there, your master's known munificence, and that means generosity with regards to money. Munificence is where you are generous and you give your money freely. So we start to see his priorities there. He mentions your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed. He's basically saying there that he knows that he will benefit financially, fiscally from this particular engagement, this marriage. And that he's speaking to a servant there through your master. As we move along, though his fair daughter's self as I avowed at starting is my object, the structure there is very interesting. He mentions the master's known munificence, and then he remembers to mention the daughter. The first mention is the dowry, and then the second mention is the daughter's self being the object of his affections. It's clearly not. The fact that Browning's put that kind of money mention first means that that is that speaker's first priority, or at least that's how I interpret it. And then towards the end, we've got this idea of more art being mentioned. Notice Neptune, though taming a seahorse, thought a rarity which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. Somebody did something for him. Again, he's clearly powerful. But that verb there, taming a seahorse, something that's wild, a wild animal, and Neptune being a godly figure is quite important. There's an implication of control there, having power over someone, forcing someone into submission. And it really hammers home the message of that entire dramatic monologue. So just the last few things we might want to pay attention to. There are some rhyming couplets in there. There's iambic pentameter. A lot of that is because this is dramatic monologue and it's supposed to sound natural, like natural speech, which it kind of does. But there's also there this kind of tightly controlled way of structuring the poem, which really underlines and emphasises the control that this Duke is trying to have over the Duchess, but also how he's trying to control himself, how he's trying to control the way he's perceived. And occasionally there are times when he almost loses that control, and we start to see, as I said before, his paranoia being underlined. Okay.